I'm Christopher Hope, the Chief Political Correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, and this is Chopper's Politics. Now cast your minds back to 5 long years ago.
You remember the oven-ready deal, by which we came out on January the 31st? That oven-ready deal was just the start of This Is the Feast. I'm afraid we're still very far apart on some key things. I am forming a new government, and on Monday, MPs will arrive at Westminster to form a new parliament.
The withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation.
I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. The only way to guarantee certainty and stability for the years ahead is to hold this election.
The total number of votes cast in favour of leave was 17,410,742.
That's right, in July 2016, Britain voted to leave the European Union. Now, as that Brexit vote approaches its half-decade anniversary, I'm asking 2 leading Brexiteers whether they've got what they voted for. Are the trade deals being signed by Liz Truss as plentiful as they had hoped? Is the Irish border issue well and truly resolved? And if not, when will it be? And don't get me started about the fish. Well, David Jones, the Deputy Chairman of the European Research Group of Eurosceptic Tory MPs, and Kate Hoey, or Baroness Hoey, a former Labour MP for 2 decades and prominent supporter of the Vote Leave campaign, are joining me this week to discuss just that. David Jones and Kate Hoey, welcome to Chopper's Politics in person for the first time in months. Great to see you here in Telegraph Towers. Let's start with the big question. To you first, David Jones, is this the Brexit you envisaged 5 years ago when you supported the Brexit campaign?
Well, it's approaching the Brexit that I wanted. I mean, the view I always took was that in order to leave the European Union, you had to be out of the single market, out of the customs union, and not subject to the European Court of Justice's jurisdiction. And we have pretty well got there. The only sad exception, of course, at the moment is the issue of Northern Ireland, which, of course, is exercising a lot of Brexiteers. But apart from that, and when you consider all the problems that we had during the Theresa May years, I think that what we've achieved is quite remarkable, and I'm very pleased with it.
And how close you came to losing it. I mean, had Keir Starmer or others on Labour's side bought Theresa May's deal, it could have been completely different now, couldn't it?
Well, yes, and I remind you that it was 28 Conservative MPs who saved the day, and I'm proud to have been one of them.
The Spartans. Kate Hoey, of course, you were one of the few Labour MPs backing Brexit. You've co-chaired Labour Leave, and now you're a non-aligned peer in the House of Lords. Is this the Brexit you thought you were going to get 5 years ago?
Well, I agree with David in that, it was such a relief to get over the line, to actually get most of the United Kingdom out of the European Union, and knowing that what we'd gone through to get there, not just winning the referendum at all, the parliamentary shenanigans. But of course, I feel very strongly that Northern Ireland has not left the European Union. Northern Ireland's an integral part of the United Kingdom, and therefore until we are out of the customs union and the single market and not subject to the European Court of Justice, it won't be a complete Brexit. But I'm not going to sort of quibble about the fact of what a huge, huge step it was to get the referendum result and then to get it through Parliament despite everything.
So on Northern Ireland, how will that be resolved, do you think? Do you think that was a massive blind spot by Boris Johnson? Has he cocked up, or is the European Union showing some bad faith by over-checking the border between GB and Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the Prime Minister was genuinely faced with a dilemma. He could have lost the whole thing. And I think he felt, and I think there's no doubt about it, he told people he knew that it was going to cause problems. I don't think anyone realised just how dreadful the EU would behave. But also I think most people felt that once we were out, then we would be able to change it. And indeed, there is something in it, Article 16, that allows it to be invoked and allows for the societal problems that it's definitely causing, as well as the economic problems, to be resolved by revoking it. So I refuse to sort of blame Boris, because I actually blame people like Keir Starmer and my own party, or my old original party, even more.
Why Keir Starmer?
Well, because Keir led the actual.
He encouraged
yes,
the
he encouraged
EU
he encouraged people to delay, to call for a second referendum, which was when I finally gave up on the Labour Party. But I do think that I'll forgive Boris if he now gets us out again of this protocol, and I think it will happen. I know that the conventional wisdom amongst Irish government and the European Union is the protocol cannot change. Well, I'm sorry, but the protocol will change because it is just unsustainable.
David Jones, what do you think the government might do to deal with this? What will Lord Frost do? I know you've been meeting him recently.
Yes, and Lord Frost certainly gets the sort of problems that Kate's just been outlining, and they do have to be resolved. As Kate says, we have got Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol to invoke if we feel that there's disruption, both in terms of the economy and society in Northern Ireland. And I think that if the EU maintain their current stance, which is pretty obdurate, he will invoke that, or at least he will invite the Prime Minister to do so.
Yes, I think... people underestimate maybe Boris Johnson still, despite the public don't seem to. But I think, and I think some people in the Westminster bubble do, and I think he could act very quickly on this. We're coming up to colloquially known as the marching season. People are very angry. Every evening there are little protests all over Northern Ireland, and the average person who is pro-union knows that this is an attack on their Britishness, and they want things to do. So they are going out marching peacefully. And of course, it gets no publicity amongst the media. So people are feeling very frustrated and very much a feeling that this is a real test of just whether the United Kingdom government genuinely cares about the union.
What will happen, do you think, if there's no actual solution to this or no movement before July the 12th?
Well, everyone is urging peaceful demonstrations, and that I think will be the overwhelming response. But of course, there are always going to be individuals who will do silly things, as you do. We saw those people chasing the BBC journalist yesterday.
That's right.
Or last week.
On a mask issue, a separate issue to this.
But I think the European Union needs to understand Northern Ireland better. They have been completely taken in by the propaganda of the Irish government, and the British government went along with it, unfortunately. And you remember, let's be honest, this all happened because there was a desire not to have any kind of border at the frontier between our two countries, an independent Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. And the reason that was said to have to happen was Varadkar himself went to the European Union, held up a picture of a customs post having been blown up and said, if we have any kind of border there, this is what will happen. And now people on the pro-union side are saying, well, hang on, especially young people who are frustrated and angry and haven't seen any economic benefits from the peace process, are saying, well, hang on, look what you get when you threaten violence.
Do you think that he may have showed his hand this week, Leo Varadkar? He's reported as saying that he believes in the unification of our island, that's Ireland, and it can happen in my lifetime. Do you think he or others were trying to use Brexit to force the pace of unification?
Oh, of course, that was what was behind a lot of the Irish government's moves, the idea that you get an economic united Ireland, then that makes it much easier to get the political economic. But I think he's completely wrong. I mean, there have been some polls done just very recently. The Times Life poll showed very clearly that very, very few people extra wanting United Ireland, because, of course, not just constitutionally, people who feel an identity like I do of being British, it's also economically much, much better for us to be part of the Union. We saw that with vaccination. Look at the Republic of Ireland. They're part of the EU and they've done very badly, and we've done very well.
And David Jones, just finally on this issue, do you think that one solution could be this idea of mutual enforcement, which I know the ERG have been pushing, which essentially is both sides enforcing at the same level, and that should bring it down to near zero at the border?
That's right. I mean, what it would mean is that each side would be responsible for checking the goods that passed out of their jurisdictions rather than the reverse, which is what's happening at the moment. And that is the sensible way forward, because at the moment the European Union are really over-enforcing. They're being over-diligent in their
and that's raising the tension.
Good. Well, it is. And, of course, the other point is that it's a very, very simple, straightforward way of achieving it. The difficulty is, of course, that although I happen to know that a paper proposing that has been submitted to the European Commission, they're apparently refusing to engage with it. So it just tends to suggest that what they're actually about is making life as difficult as possible for the people of Great Britain.
And do you think Boris Johnson might invoke Article 16? He might. What are the odds on that happening?
I've no doubt that is what is in his mind. I mean, he made that very clear over the weekend, that there were courses available to him, and I would imagine that Article 16 is what is in his mind.
But it's very interesting that the European Union what they really want is the rest of the United Kingdom to come back in under their own regulations and so on. And I can't see that ever happening, because I can't see the ERG allowing that to happen.
Well, clearly, if they're talking about continued alignment, I think that's out of the question now that, of course, we've struck a free trade agreement with Australia.
Well, I'm holding up a copy of today's Telegraph business section. Britain opened gates to Aussie beef. Now, this is the first deal struck by the UK to be negotiated and agreed and sorted out since Brexit, David Jones. It's quite a moment, isn't it, I think?
I think it is an important moment. We were always told by people such as Lord Adonis that it would be impossible to strike free trade agreements because we hadn't got the expertise or the knowledge. And, of course, we've achieved it within 6 months of leaving the transitional agreement. But, by the way, the one thing I would take issue with is the headline there. I actually think that the Australians will not be wanting to export vast quantities of beef and lamb to the UK because they've already got extremely big markets in Asia.
Yes, but the deal does allow for the UK immediately accepting up to 35,000 tonnes of tariff-free beef. And the NFU is not happy about this. Is that because they're protecting their market? I mean, surely the point of Brexit is you label beef wherever it comes from. And if it brings down food prices for people who can't afford more expensive beef, that's a good thing.
I think that the NFU should regard this as an opportunity. What we've got now is a huge market on the other side of the world, which will shortly be expanding probably into the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the most dynamic market anywhere. And the opportunities for high-quality British beef and lamb and other agricultural produce is huge. And quite honestly, why the NFU won't regard it as an opportunity but seem to be resorting to what is fairly straightforward protectionism, I don't know.
And Kate Hoey, do you buy this hype about this Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership? It's a $9 billion, I think, trading union that we can try and be part of, can't we, through Australia's trade deal?
It can't do us any harm to be part of it, can it? You know, one of the key things about leaving the EU was that we were going to be not tied to that small sort of almost shrinking sort of European Union and looking at outside. But on the farming issue too, I think it's an opportunity for the NFU and for people who care, and I'm brought up on a farm, care about farming in the United Kingdom to actually promote British good food more. And, the idea almost that anyone would go into a supermarket and choose a Danish something when they could have British. But we don't sell that enough. We're almost too quiet about how good our food is. It used to be, when we were in the EU, seen as not really very fashionable to say that.
And of course, the other point, which again is never touched on, is that our standards will not be changing at all. Yeah. We will have certain minimum food standards that prevail in this country. And if the Australians want to export beef or lamb to this country, then they will have to adhere to them. Yeah. And what is very interesting about the NFU's position is that it doesn't appear to have any objection at all to unlimited quantities of beef and lamb coming in from the European Union.
Where the animal welfare standards are, in reality, are so much worse, despite all the EU directives and this and that. Anyone who goes to certain countries in the European Union and sees how they treat even animals just out and around know that their standards are not like ours.
So you detect a double standard here, do you?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the horse meat scandal of a few years ago originated in the European Union.
Yeah.
What many remember from the campaign 5 years ago is the bus and the number on the side of the bus. Is that money, the £350 million a week, was a gross figure, maybe a net figure, a bit less than that, 190 million, whatever the figure was, is that now been repatriated, David Jones?
Well, I think when one looks at the enormous sums that the government has spent over the last 18 months dealing with COVID, it's quite clear that we did have the extra money to spend. And we know that 30 more hospitals are going to be built across the country. Everybody,
your script from Boris Johnson.
Everybody, of course, recognised that was an illustration, but it was a very imaginative illustration. And all of a sudden, people realised, hang on a second, we're not receiving money from the EU. We're sending huge sums of money every week to the EU. And that was the cleverness of that particular slogan.
Yeah, and all this talk about aid and cutting back our aid when we're in a pretty bad situation. I think it's been pointed out exactly the same amount we've cut from aid. We are still having to give to the EU on this ridiculous amount every year for the next, wasn't it 3 years? And you see, if the EU play hardball, I mean, I just wish we would be a little bit tougher now when we're independent and say, sorry, we're not paying you anymore.
Hello, Brian Moore, the former England hooker here. The Lions is back, and so is my podcast, Brian Moore's Full Contact. Ahead of the tour of South Africa, I'll be reliving great rugby moments with Lions legends like Sir Ian McGeechan, Alex Corbisiero and John Schmidt. Can't nab a front row seat this year, but with our podcast, you just don't need one. Search for Brian Moore's Full Contact on your podcast app, hit subscribe, it's all free, and make sure you don't miss it.
In terms of immigration, that was another thing which was driving the Brexit vote. Are you content with the way this has been dealt with post-Brexit? I mean, the deadline for people to apply for settled status is the end of this month. The latest figures we saw is well over 5 million people have applied just to live here, which is fantastic, a huge number. And after that, there'll be a degree of control, won't there, from Priti Patel's policy. David Jones.
I think that's right. We have to remember that we've got a very dynamic economy in this country, and we frankly have needed the labour that we've been importing from the European Union. And all those people who've come to this country to work over the years are obviously welcome. We're anxious that they should remain here. And I think we've had a very generous policy in terms of allowing them the continued.
So are you saying you want more European Union people to come in?
No.
Which is what Remainers will get mad about that, David Jones.
What I'm saying is this. There was a suggestion at the time that the Brexit debate was motivated by xenophobia. It wasn't motivated by that at all. It was motivated by the simple desire that most countries have got to be in charge of their own affairs. And, you know, I'm sure Kate is too, very happy to welcome all the EU citizens who come to work here. But now we're in the position of controlling our own borders, which, of course, we were not when we were still members.
And they can come from all over the world.
Well,
that's
to me the most important, one of the most important points, that we now can allow those people from our very trustworthy and loyal kind of Commonwealth countries to have more chance of being able to come in. And also what's great is how we've been proved right about how the wages of lower paid workers in those areas where there are shortages are going up. And, you know, that was just so much the...
Is that being tracked somewhere? Is that right?
Well, yeah, yes. And indeed, the former chairman of the Marks and Spencers, who was the chairman of the... Stuart Rose said that just recently, you know, that he realised their campaign had been, you know, rather silly and some of the things that they'd done. So... again, it's just another thing.
And that's why Jeremy Corbyn supported Brexit, don't forget. Well yes. Allegedly. Let's rephrase that.
He was muzzled or whatever happened to him.
But that's why the left also supported the idea of Brexit, because they could see an uplift in wages
there's
for their members.
Absolutely no doubt about it that up in those so-called, you know, red wall seats, wages were very, very low, and they were people coming from the European Union who were prepared to take those low wages.
Dave Jones?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what we're actually seeing is an increase in employment now. We're seeing a very, very quick rebound from the COVID crisis. And all the outlooks that I see are very, very rosy for the United Kingdom. And I think that those people who suggested that we were going to flop, and in fact, in many cases seemed to want us to flop once we left the EU, have been pretty well proven wrong.
And with all this increase in little boats coming over from the continent, that happened all the time whenever summer.
Yes, that's right. And clearly that's got to be addressed. But the fact is that we are an island with a very long coastline. It's very hard to police all of it. And what we need to do is to put in place the sort of measures that Priti Patel is putting in place to make sure that if people are declaring themselves as refugees, then they have to prove it pretty quickly, and they can't come back with further successive attempts.
But it's pretty silly the way the media go on about asylum seekers. I mean, there's probably only a very small number who are genuine asylum seekers. They're migrants who want to have a better life, and you can't blame them for that. But at the same time, you know, we can't allow it to happen. And it does look sometimes as if, you know, our boats are actually going out to almost encourage people to come, because don't worry, you come out
recently, wasn't there?
Yeah, but I think
it's a difficult line between humanitarian protection and enforcing a border, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very difficult, and it's very easy for the sort of emotional side to be, you know, coming into play. But we have to be realistic about what our country can have.
Is there a figure based on, you said there that many of them are not asylum seekers. Is that based on analysis you've seen from Home Office,
I
or?
don't know the exact, but I mean, I would say that the numbers who are coming mostly from North African are not asylum seekers. Obviously, some people from Afghanistan and so on. But, the reality is they've come through many other countries that are safe. Why do they want to come to us? And I think that's in a way a great flag-waving thing for our country, that all these people, they all want to come to our country. Doesn't that say something about us as a country?
Yeah, perhaps we should be proud that it's a good thing they want to come here, and perhaps we're a welcoming country.
Yeah,
maybe.
but we can't keep having hundreds of people coming in every day illegally.
But David Jones, one concern is fisheries. Do you think that this deal will start to improve, do you think, for our coastal communities?
Well, we have got a 5-year period in which the current arrangements will be tapered off. I have to say that was a disappointment to me. However, it was a negotiation, and ultimately we will regain control of our own waters.
And that's a reminder that it's a process, Brexit, not a finishing line, isn't it?
Well, that's right. And I think that anyone has to recognise that in any negotiation, you're not going to get precisely what you came in looking for. I mean, frankly, the prospect of regaining control of UK fishing waters after 5 years is pretty good. The government has, of course, given support to the fishing industry to get them used to the new arrangements. If we had, in fact, decided on day one that we would exclude all EU trawlers from our waters, then we wouldn't have had a sufficient fishing fleet of our own to fish those waters. So it's something that will have to be managed ultimately in agreement with the EU and with Norway. But the point is that we will be negotiating there as an individual sovereign country, which we weren't before. Subsequently, we had to comply with the common fisheries policy, which had such huge damage to the British fishing industry.
Howie?
Yes, but I mean, apart from Northern Ireland, the fishing arrangement was something that I felt very unhappy about too. Again, as David said, I suppose, given that we were not prepared to go for a no deal, we were never going to get absolutely everything. And I think there has been some extra money put in and all of that. But I do think, sometimes I just still get so tired now of every government minister, when they're talking about anything to do with the EU, talk about our friends and whatever, I mean, I don't think we have to be crawling to the EU still. I think we should be actually standing up for
I sometimes think, though, Kate, that there's a tone of irony.
Oh, do you think it is? You mean they're saying something they don't mean, David?
On the part of the Prime Minister and other. I think it's a very good thing to be polite to people when they're
Do you think we are crawling to the EU, David?
No, I don't. I actually think
No, I don't think so
either.
really.
In David Frost, we have got a very tough negotiator who knows exactly what he wants, and I'm sure will.
I've met David Frost a number of times recently, privately and
PM as Brexit advisor,
Northern Ireland, and I'm absolutely convinced that he genuinely gets it. And if he is allowed to continue doing what he's doing, I'm very confident.
Yes, bear in mind too that he's a diplomat.
He's a diplomat.
And he knows how to engage in negotiations, very tough negotiations, while being studiously polite. And that's David Frost.
And I think what was good about the weekend, because the EU had been trying to paint him as the hard guy. He's the only one. But then behind the scenes, Dominic Raab came out, Boris himself spoke, and that was good.
Well, those comments about the Toulouse sausages were quite telling from Macron, weren't they?
Well, they were very, very telling. I was a minister in the Brexit department for a while, and I know that our departure from the EU has caused a tremendous amount of hostility and resentment to those who, like President Macron, seem to regard the European Union as a religious project rather than a political one.
Or rather an economic one, which is possibly whether...
Well, by leaving, of course, what we've actually done is we've committed an act of apostasy so far as people like Macron are concerned. And I think that it's all coming out now. They are hugely resentful of our decision to
And I think
depart.
what was more telling almost was that the Prime Minister was prepared to sort of go public on that. He could have just ignored it and sort of said,
it was the right thing to do.
It was, absolutely.
I should just explain to listeners, the Toulouse comments were about President Macron talking about the fact that you wouldn't want to stop sausages going from Toulouse in the south of France to Paris in the north, and he didn't see the difference between GB and Northern Ireland, and see that's the issue of sausages going from the mainland of Britain into Northern Ireland being a problem for the European Union.
And what's particularly interesting is that the French Fisheries Minister represents the the department of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, which are 2 islands off the coast of Canada. And you really wonder what would have happened if it had been suggested to Macron that you couldn't send sausages to Saint-Pierre and Miquelon.
What's your view on how the government, the civil service, is approaching Brexit? Do they understand the new position that we have in the world? I mean, Kate talked about crawling.
Well, can I just say that crawling is probably...
No, but I think that speaks for some kind of emotion.
What I'm very keen to see now is that the civil service and our ministers recognise we are now an independent country.
Do they see that? That's my point.
Well, I think the civil service is a longer haul battle on this, because there's no doubt about it. They've had years and years of EU kind of almost checking with Brussels whether they can do something. That is going to need to be changed, but you need ministers taking the leadership.
And Kate is entirely right there. What we've got is a civil service in which there are no civil servants who were around at a time when Britain was not part of the European Union. And this applies in other walks of life too. The same applies to the judiciary. And really, all the institutions of our country have got to get used to the idea that we're now an independent country.
It's on them, right? So you've got to work hard. You can't hide behind the coattails of
they're accountable now.
But having said that, we have got very, very high caliber people in the upper echelons of both the civil service and, of course, the judiciary. And I've no doubt that they will get used to the new arrangements.
There's a report out this week from Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, former Tory party leader, along with Therese Villiers, former Brexit cabinet minister, and George Freeman, a free thinker, Tory MP, talking about how Boris Johnson can start to destroy, burn red tape and take advantage of Brexit. You're aware of this report, aren't you, David Jones?
Yes, I am. I haven't read it yet, but I've seen the headlines. And one of the things I'm particularly pleased about is the report's suggestion that we should ditch the precautionary principle.
What is that?
Well, the precautionary principle is a European legal position whereby any new policy has to be tested to destruction before it will be allowed to be let loose, if you like, upon the people of the European Union. And frankly, if we'd adopted the precautionary principle throughout history, Orville and Wilbur Wright would still be waiting to take off. And that is the effect that the precautionary principle has. It has an absolutely chilling effect upon endeavour and enterprise.
Is that an EU thing or just general rubbishness amongst the bureaucracy?
No, it is an official EU principle, and it's one that frankly doesn't work. It works against enterprise and innovation, and Ian Duncan-Smith is entirely right to say it should be junked.
Yeah, and of course we took into our law all the EU regulations and red tape issues, and that was quite a big issue going around meetings and during the referendum campaign. We want to get rid of a lot of that, and I think a lot of the departments have been quite slow now, but obviously COVID has delayed a lot of that. I think when we're free of that should be the next big bonfire.
Is life better now outside the European Union? David Jones?
I think it's considerably better. I mean,
why? The sun's shining. What else?
Well, the sun's shining. Wales is about to win the Euros, and things are looking. I think actually what this country has achieved is the restoration of self-respect for the people of this country. We were always a semi-detached member of the European Union. We were always really the awkward squad in any of the councils of the EU. And what we've now done is to recognise that we have a different role in the world. And I remember that it was de Gaulle who said that if the UK is asked to choose between the European Union and the open sea, she will always choose the open sea. And we're now choosing the open sea again.
Kate Hoey.
Yes, it is a sense of freedom. I do actually genuinely feel different about this. I feel that, every day there's something that you think, goodness, we can do that now. And we need to be able to grab onto that. Yeah. We just have to look. The one thing that now I think has united the country is the way we handled our vaccination. And that would not have happened if we'd been in the EU.
As a former Labour MP, do you worry about what might happen in the 2024 election or 2023 election, wherever it's going to be? David Jones might know the date. I don't. But do you worry that Keir Starmer might try and reverse that, or there could be a Remain plot to reverse the decision?
Well, I was astonished to hear Gordon Brown talk about, wanting to. No, I quite honestly, I don't think it'll make much difference, because I don't think there's any chance whatsoever, I have to be honest, to think Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister probably ever. OK, setting aside his chance of being Prime Minister, do you think that we'll ever rejoin? Perhaps a more wider question. David Jones?
No, I don't think we will. I think it's a question of once bitten, twice shy. The European Union is clearly progressing down an increasingly federalist route. They're talking about European armies and so on, and I don't think that the people of this country would accept that.
That ship has sailed.
That ship has gone, and we, of course, to repeat, have now decided to sail our own ship.
Yes, and we
Possibly a
don't,
Britannia ship.
we don't know who within the EU is beginning to feel, when we become more successful and look at what we're doing, might start thinking, well, actually, maybe we should give it a go.
Do you think that might, Italex, it's been forecast for a bit, Italy leaving the European Union, other places?
I think they're concerned about it, and the fact that they're concerned about it is the fact that they have now launched this Conference on the Future of Europe, which is a 12-month process. They themselves are concerned about what's happened as a consequence of Brexit. And interestingly, we're hearing senior EU politicians saying that Brexit was a failure for the European Union. Yeah. They are starting to recognise that there is something structurally and inherently wrong in the EU. If they address it properly, if they become maybe a free trade area, which was the original vision, then it may be different. But we've got so many zealots there.
And I should be very controversial and say that while sort of 15 years ago everyone said we could never leave the EU, I believe that in the relatively short term in these kind of things, the Republic of Ireland will probably decide. There's a big debate starting there, and I think that is the logical thing to happen, that the Republic of Ireland leaves the European Union. Now they're a contributor.
Just final question. Out of 100, how much of Brexit has been achieved so far? David Jones.
80%.
Kate Hoey.
75.
More to do. Thank you both. It's been great to talk about what's left to do. Great to see you in person. Thank you for coming on this week's Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for me this week, listeners. But I would love to hear from you. What did you think of what Kate and David had to say there? Do you agree that Ireland will end up leaving the European Union? Are ministers crawling too much to Brussels? And should we be worried about life on the open waves away from the protective port of Brussels? Do let us know by emailing us chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk or find us on Twitter. We're @ChoppersPodcast. Or you can share your thoughts on Apple Podcasts. Please do leave a review. It really helps other people find this show. Now, if you're not already a Telegraph subscriber, well, why not? But you're really missing out. So please go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper to get your first month free, and then the next 2 months for just 50p a month. Don't say we don't treat you. And that will, of course, give you access to all of the best Telegraph journalism and content, including stuff by me. Thank you to my guests again this week, Kate Hoey and David Jones. Thank you to my brilliant team of producers, Louisa Wales, Elliot Lampitt, and Theo Luludis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. And please finally do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. Until next time, though, cheerio!